To build a fire, Jack London. Day had broken cold and gray, exceedingly cold. The man turned away from the main Yukon Trail and climbed a hill from where he spied a little traveled trail. He paused at the top of the hill and looked at his watch. It was 9 o'clock. The man turned away from the main Yukon Trail and climbed a hill from where he spotted a little traveled trail. He paused at the top of the hill and looked at his watch. It was 9 o'clock. It was a clear day. There was no sun and not a cloud in the sky. He felt a subtle sense of gloom caused by the lack of sun, but this did not worry him. It had been days since he had seen the sun. He was used to lack of sun, and he knew that more days would pass before the sun would be in view again. The man paused and looked around. The Yukon River was a mile wide and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of the ice were 3 feet of snow, all pure white. As far as the eye could see, the landscape was pure, unbroken white, except for a dark hairline that curved and twisted both to the south and to the north. This dark hairline was actually the main trail that went on for miles and miles, hundreds of miles to the south, and thousands of miles to the north. But all of this, the far-reaching trail, the absence of sun in the sky, the tremendous cold, and the strangeness of it all, made no impression upon the man. You would think it would have. He was a newcomer to this land, and this was his first winter. But the trouble was that he had no imagination. He was quick and alert with dealing with actual things in life, but he did not see below the surface. He did not understand the meaning of things. For instance, that temperature of 50 degrees below zero actually felt much, much colder. He understood only that this was cold and he was uncomfortable, but that was all. He did not think about the significance of the temperature, that a man could only live within a range of certain temperatures, that there were limits to how much cold or heat a man could endure. He did not think of it in terms of life and death. 50 degrees below just meant to him the need to wear mittens, ear flaps, thick socks, and warm moccasins to protect against the hurt of frostbite. He didn't think beyond the basics of plain being cold. Nothing more entered his mind. As he got ready to walk on, he spat. It was a sharp, explosive, crackling sound. He spat again. He was startled to find that the spittle froze in the air before it even reached the ground. From this he knew it was colder than 50 below zero. Exactly how much, he didn't know. And it didn't matter to him. He was on his way to meet his friends at a place along Henderson Creek. He would reach their camp by 6 p.m. He knew his friends would be waiting. There would be a fire blazing, and a hot supper would be ready. Then he thought about his lunch. He had biscuits bundled up in a handkerchief and stored beneath his jacket next to his bare skin. This was the only way to keep them from freezing. He smiled to himself, thinking of these biscuits, each enclosing a big slice of bacon. He started to walk on through the big spruce trees. It was hard to even see the trail. A foot of snow had fallen since the last sled had gone by. But he was glad he was on foot, without a sled, traveling light. In fact, the only thing he carried was his lunch. He was surprised as he walked in the extreme cold. He had mittens on his hands and rubbed his nose and cheekbones, which felt numb from the cold. He had a full red beard, but the hair on his face did not protect the cheekbones or nose, which were still exposed to the frosty air. A dog trotted at the man's heels, a big husky with a gray coat, very similar in temperament to his relative, the wild wolf. The dog was depressed by the freezing cold. He knew it was way too cold to be traveling. The dog's animal instincts were truer than the man's judgment. In reality, it was not just colder than 50 below zero. It was not just colder than 60 below. It was even colder than 70 below. The dog didn't know anything about thermometers. It couldn't think or reason like a man, but animal instinct told it everything it needed to know. The dog questioned every movement of the man, expecting him to find shelter and build a fire. The dog had learned about fire. The dog wanted the warmth of the fire, to burrow under the snow and cuddle up to keep warm, away from the cold air. Because of the extreme cold, the moisture from the dog's breathing settled on his fur, his face, even his eyelashes, as a fine frosty powder. The man's beard and mustache were covered with frost, just like the dog. It was so very cold that a muzzle of the ice held his lips, rigidly frozen. The man walked on and stopped at a small cream. Yes, cream, a small. This was Henderson Creek. He knew he was only 10 miles from a fork in the stream. He looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock. He was traveling 4 miles an hour. He figured out that he would arrive at the fork at 12:30. He decided to celebrate that event by eating his lunch there. The dog walked slowly at his heels, with its tail drooping with discouragement, as the man walked along the creek bed. The old sled trail was visible, but a dozen inches of snow covered the marks of the last sled that traveled there. No one had come up or down the creek in more than a month. The man moved steadily on. There was no one to talk to, and had there been, speech would have been impossible because of the muzzle of ice on his mouth. Once in a while, he realized that it felt very cold. He had never experienced such cold. As he walked along, he rubbed his cheekbones and nose with the back of his mittened hands. But as much as he would rub, the instant he stopped, the cheekbones went numb, and an instant later, the end of his nose went numb, and frost covered his cheeks. He was sorry he hadn't devised a strap that would pass across his cheeks and save them from the biting cold. But then it didn't matter much, after all. What were frosted cheeks? A bit painful, that was all. They were never serious. The man always sharply noted where he placed his feet as he walked. Once, coming around a bend, he backed up abruptly, like a startled horse, and retreated several paces back along the trail. He knew the creek was frozen solid, clear to the bottom. No creek could contain water in this Arctic winter. But he also knew that there were springs that bubbled out and ran along under the snow and on top of the ice on the creek. He knew that even the coldest snaps never froze these springs. And he knew his danger. They were traps. They hid pools of water under the snow that might be 3 inches deep or 3 feet deep. Sometimes a layer of ice 1/2 an inch thick covered them, and that was in turn covered by the snow. Sometimes there were several layers of water and ice, so that when one took a step on what looked like snow, he would break through, getting himself wet to the waist in icy water. That was why he had backed up in such a panic. He heard the crackle of the ice as it began to give way under his feet. To get his feet wet in such a cold temperature meant trouble and danger, and wet socks. At the very least, it meant delay, for he would be forced to stop and build a fire, and bare his feet while he studied the creek and its banks, and while he dried his socks and moccasins. He stood and studied the creek and its banks and decided that the flow of the water came from the right. He thought for a while, rubbing his nose and cheeks, then stepped gingerly to the left, testing the footing for each step. He made it safely through, took a fresh chew of tobacco, and continued along at his 4-mile-an-hour gait.